DW Inside Europe.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kate Laycock in Germany. On today's programme, the familiar face of France's new Prime Minister.
The Brits got to know quite well, and some of them perhaps quail slightly at this tall, impassive figure with the steely blue eyes.
Turkey's naval expansion plans and what they mean for Europe, plus...
I'm Colonel Anders Rieks, National Defense HQ. We are on the main road A13, 12 kilometers from the Russian border.
A windswept trip to patrol the Baltic defence line. Those stories and more coming up. Now, remember this?
We had a constructive meeting with Steve Barclay, the British team, and now I'm going to debrief the 27 ambassadors and the Brexit steering group of the Parliament. But I've already said that the Brexit is like climbing a mountain. We need vigilance, determination and patience.
Are we near the top?
Are you near
the peak of that mountain?
Has that been a break?
Are you near the peak of that mountain?
That was a certain Michel Barnier, then Europe's chief Brexit negotiator, giving a characteristically tough and pithy verdict on Britain's acrimonious exit from the EU some 4 years ago. As of last week, Barnier is back as French Prime Minister. To find out how and why this unlikely comeback has come about, I spoke to our Paris correspondent, John Lawrenson, upon whom it seems Barnier's Brexit years left quite an impression.
Yes, it's that Michel Barnier, the man who, for what felt like a very long time, was Brussels' chief negotiator tasked with getting the best possible deal for Europe, or at least the worst possible deal for the UK, following the British vote to leave the European Union. The Brits got to know quite well, and some of them perhaps quail slightly at this tall, impassive figure with the steely blue eyes, who's suddenly making this quite spectacular political comeback in France. And French politicians, they have what you might call the Johnny Hallyday syndrome. When they lose elections, they tend not to go off and join the board of some company or go on the conference circuit. They do what they call a traversée du désert, a crossing of the desert, a sort of politician's version of rehab, before making a comeback.
Well, John, thank you there, and thank you as well for doing that incredibly French thing and referencing a pop star there that nobody outside of France has actually heard of.
You haven't heard of Johnny Hallyday, you don't know what you're missing.
Johnny Hallyday. Listen, back to Michel Barnier. There is one thing that I just don't really understand here, John. Maybe you can explain it for me, because I distinctly remember that just before I went on my summer holidays, there was an election in France, right? I'm not imagining this. Legislative elections. The Left Alliance came top of those, closely followed by Marine Le Pen's far-right National Rally Party. But Barnier, he's from neither of those camps.
You're right. I mean, on the face of it, this nomination doesn't seem very democratic. And that is, of course, what the leaders of the left-wing alliance that you mentioned, the New Popular Front, as it's called, is saying. But to answer your question, Barnier became PM because there is a chance that he might be able to use his old Brexit negotiating skills to negotiate himself a working majority in Parliament. If Macron had picked a prime minister from the ranks of the two parties that did best in the June elections, then they would have been voted down in a no-confidence motion straight away. The left, although they were a long way from getting a parliamentary majority, were just insufficiently willing, I think, to compromise following what they considered to have been their victory. In the centre and on the right, they were willing to compromise, and so they got the premiership.
So basically, the French have got a sort of a right-wing technocrat that Macron hopes is going to keep the wheels running when they very decidedly voted for change, whether that was with the left-wing alliance or with the far-right National Rally Party. How are the French taking all this?
Well, on the left, they're taking it badly. This having been said, the demonstration to cry scandal at this nomination only attracted about 30,000 people in Paris this weekend. Many are also shocked, or at least a bit uneasy, about the fact that the Barnier option is only going to be workable with the support of Marine Le Pen's National Rally. In other words, this party that during the election, everyone in Macron's centrist camp, almost everyone in Barnier's centre-right camp were saying were dangerous extremists, a danger to democracy, etc., that had to be stopped at all costs, are now being treated, tacitly at least, unofficially at least, as allies. I think, though, many French people will have heaved a big sigh of relief that Macron did choose someone like him. He does seem, to many people, I think, like a steady, serious figure who's not going to further bankrupt the country and who is in tune with public opinion on two issues they care about a lot, which are immigration and law and order.
Nevertheless, we do there have a weakening of the cordon sanitaire. Let's talk about Emmanuel Macron, because he is really, of course, the figure at the centre of all this. He's at that stage, John, in his career where politicians start thinking about their legacy. How do you think he wants to be remembered?
Well, I think what he was initially hoping for was to be this figure who was going to unite the French, to get them to rise above the right-left divide, find rational, technical, European solutions to their problems. I think at this point, that legacy is looking unlikely. I don't think that's what he's going to be remembered for. What he might still hope for is to be seen as a leader who encouraged start-up entrepreneurialism and even a bit of re-industrialization of France, while managing to push through an unpopular retirement pension reform. He has, by his standards, done quite well in that area at least.
Right, OK, so that's how Emmanuel Macron himself might like to be remembered, might hope to be remembered, perhaps. Come 2027, John, how do you think he is likely to be remembered?
I think he'll be seen as another French leader in what's becoming quite a long list who presided over the decline of France, because this country has, on his watch, become more divided and more violent. At the same time, in what's supposed to be a strong area, the economy, many people feel poorer than when he came to power, and he's not been able to prevent France's national debt rising to very high levels. But now his reputation is, to a large degree, in the hands of Michel Barnier. Perhaps he'll do well. If he does, then Macron's record will look better in 2027 than it does today.
Our Paris correspondent John Lawrenson there. 2027 is, of course, the year of presidential elections in France. Can the appointment of Michel Barnier help Emmanuel Macron avoid going down in history as the man who handed the Élysée over to Marine Le Pen? Time will tell. In the meantime, we'll continue our reporting here on Inside Europe. Do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We have a security theme coming up now with two reports, one from the Baltic, the other from the Bosphorus. From Istanbul, to be precise, where our reporter Dorian Jones has been following the story of the unprecedented naval expansion that looks set to make Turkey one of Europe's largest naval powers. This unprecedented beefing up of maritime muscle has alarmed many of Turkey's neighbours, but Ankara insists the expansion is purely defensive and is needed to help it meet its growing regional commitments. Here's Dorian Jones with the story.
Deniz kuvvetlerimizin gücünü ve etkinliğini artıracak gemilerin teslimi ve
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan recently commissioned the country's latest state-of-the-art submarine, along with a helicopter carrier, new frigates, and more than a dozen other warships under construction. These are part of Erdogan's drive to make the Turkish Navy among Europe's largest. Serhat Güvenç is a professor of international relations at Kardahas University in Istanbul.
It serves Erdogan's political agenda of exerting influence overseas, from Qatar to Somalia to Libya. So that fits his vision. For Navy, that means, a greater role in the defense of the country, which is redefined, no longer territorial defense, but forward defense, from overseas. Turkish sailors used to, sail out to sea, but they would come back on the same day to their home bases and spend the night in their homes. That's no longer the case. They spend weeks and months away from home in the distant corners of the world. And therefore, essentially, materially and mentally, the Turkish Navy has transformed itself into a major regional power projection navy.
Turkey has military bases in Qatar, Libya and Somalia, the last of which has a naval agreement. Ankara insists its naval expansion is part of addressing growing regional threats and also helps meet its NATO commitments. Mesut Çarşın is a Turkish presidential advisor and a professor at Istanbul's Yeditepe University.
And when you're looking ongoing picture, all the conflict points is around the Turkey in Black Sea, even though in Mediterranean and also Red Sea. As a result, we can say that the Turkish modernization of the naval forces benefited for the NATO and security of the Western allies, and last, the security of the oil and also transiting the freedom of the navigation.
However, Turkey's growing naval prowess is causing concern, especially in its neighbour Greece. There are a number of territorial disputes between Ankara and Athens over their shared Aegean and Mediterranean seas. Israel too is expressing concern over Turkey's naval expansion and the deployment of military drones or UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, in Turkish-controlled northern Cyprus. Galia Lindenstrauss is a senior researcher at the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv, Israel.
I do see growing tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean. It's not unique to Israel. We know there's growing tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean with regard to Cyprus and Greece. I think that some of this greater Navy involvement and the greater military involvement in Northern Cyprus, this UAV base in Northern Cyprus, some of these things will also be directed against Israel. And it doesn't mean, again, that there will be direct confrontation, but it does mean that it's something that the Israeli army has to calculate.
Greece too is modernising its navy, citing the Turkish threat. Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis earlier this month reaffirmed his commitment for the need of a deterrent power against Turkey, while Israel's growing naval presence in the Eastern Mediterranean is also adding to concerns. Serhat Güvenç of Istanbul's Kadahaş University warns growing regional suspicions risk spiralling out of control.
Israel, I remember, I think it was 10 years ago, for the first time, Turkish military began to feel concerned about Israel's deployment of its nuclear missile-capable submarines in the Mediterranean. As long as they operated in the Red Sea or Indian Ocean, it was not a problem. But once Israel shifted them to the Mediterranean, they were seen as a potential threat. And so it's a vicious circle because Turkey built a new navy in response to those emerging threats. Now its neighbors are facing threats from Turkey's naval building. That's what we call arms races. And arms races do not end very well, unfortunately.
Turkish shipyards are working at full capacity to meet the country's growing naval need. But many analysts say this will likely only add to its neighbours' fears and concerns over Ankara's intentions. Dorian Jones, DW, Istanbul.
And it's not just Turkey that's tooling up. More on that in just a minute. That's with me, Kate Laycock, here on Inside Europe. Earlier this year, Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia announced the creation of an ambitious fortification project on their approximately 1,000-kilometre-long borders with Russia and Belarus. Dubbed the Baltic Defence Line, the initiative aims to protect the three Baltic states, and with it the EU and NATO, from military threats and other harmful activities from Moscow. Many experts see the Baltic nations, with their small landmasses and narrow ground link to the rest of NATO, as the place where Vladimir Putin could seek to test the alliance's unity and resolve through destabilising provocations or even an outright military attack. The prospects of such a scenario became evident earlier in the week when Latvia, along with fellow NATO member Romania, said that Russian drones violated their airspaces. Our reporter, Ben Batka, has been at the Latvian-Russian border finding out more.
A dozen or so Latvian construction workers are building a wire mesh fence. Behind them, border guards on quadricycles and armed with automatic rifles patrol on a dust road. Just meters behind the roughly 3-meter high structure, which is topped with barbed wire, a red and green boundary stone marks Russian territory. Juris Mazurs from Latvia's state border guard expects the fence on the roughly 270-kilometer-long Latvian-Russian border to be completed next year.
Construction this started from this year, April, in this area. With the Latvian and Belarusian, actually, there's already completed this fence. Latvian and Russian border this year already done almost 45%. Around 20 kilometers will be finished next year. Border guards from Russia side who is patrolling or do the also job. Patrolling we have more intensive after the war with Ukrainian. Also, we armed fully with the automatic guns, not only with the pistols.
According to Mazurs, each border surveillance unit has 39 personnel and is responsible for up to 32 kilometers of the Latvian-Russian border. Surveillance towers equipped with cameras and sensors help border guards monitor the frontier. Curbing irregular migrant arrivals remains the main purpose of the border fence. But according to Latvia's defense ministry, it is also to protect Latvia from different kinds of threats. Concerns among the 7 million Balts about a potential Russian incursion have grown since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine 2.5 years ago.
I'm Colonel Andris Rieksts, National Defense HQ. We are on the main road A13, 12 kilometers from the Russian border. Behind me we can see anti-tank Hedgehogs. This is the temporary field where we place them. During our military exercise, October, we are going to start to place them in the exact place.
Hedgehogs are anti-mobility obstacles that each weigh around 250 kilograms and consist of 3 metal beams welded together at 90-degree angles. According to Rieksts, their purpose is to stop invading vehicles long enough to make them easy targets for artillery and rockets.
If they decide to do something in Latvian territory, they will for sure in the front will send a special unit whose capability is to clear the roads. Our goal for that time is to destroy this kind of item and then wait the second to come in or the third. The main reason is to stop them as close as possible to the border and to engage, destroy and repel from the Latvian.
Latvian companies have built 2 other counter-mobility items, so-called Lego blocks and dragon's teeth, each weighing more than a ton. As the name suggests, Lego blocks can be stacked and are thus ideal for setting up road checkpoints and protecting one's own troops from enemy fire. Like Lego blocks, dragon's teeth are made of concrete, but they are a bit smaller and have a pointy top. They will be deployed permanently in open fields in multiple parallel rows, according to Colonel Rieksts. Lego blocks and Hedgehogs, on the other hand, will be stored together with ammunition and mines in yet-to-be-built engineer resource parks near the border, from where they can be deployed together within hours, Rieksts says. Latvia's defense minister Andris Spruts says his country plans to invest 330 million euros on the Baltic defense line over the next 5 years.
Baltic defense line is about deterring. It's about showing that we are prepared and we are ready for any kind of scenario. We are facing aggressor, imperialistic, expansionist country. We will have to face it in a long-term perspective. Of course, there are some more specific plans by the national governments and armed forces in Lithuania, Estonia and Latvia. We compare the notes and also think about common procurement and common activities. Now we are also engaging with Poland. Poland is also considering actually following the example of the Baltic countries, also being part of the Baltic or the eastern flank defensive border lines.
As recently as a few years ago, NATO's plan to defend the 3 Baltic countries in the event of an attack was to allow Russia to first occupy them before repelling its military with mass force several months later. Today, the strategy is to defend NATO territory from the first inch and not let Russian invaders raise cities as they have in Ukraine. The hope is that this defense by denial approach will make any attack prohibitively difficult and costly. As a result, the defense alliance has gradually stepped up its presence in the Baltics since 2016. In June, NATO announced that 23 of its 32 member states were expected to meet the alliance's defense spending commitments of 2% of national GDP this year, up from only 10 in 2023. The news came on the heels of years-long calls by the US and Baltic countries in particular for alliance members like Germany and France to finally pull their weight. Latvia, along with 4 other NATO countries, will exceed even the 3% threshold this year, according to Defense Minister Spruce.
We absolutely advocate and invite our partners to follow this lead. The Baltic countries all the time remind our partners in Europe and within NATO that investment in security and defense is absolutely crucial.
The proximity to Russia is not the only reason why the 3 Baltic states have been on a heightened state of alert. For years now, they have been the targets of Russian President Vladimir Putin's hybrid warfare in the form of disinformation campaigns, cyber warfare, and the weaponization of irregular migration. Another reason why the Balts are taking the Russian threat very seriously and why they're supporting Ukraine more than most allies is the decades-long Soviet occupation. The collective memory of mass deportations and other atrocities provided a strong incentive for them to duck under the security umbrellas of NATO and the European Union 20 years ago. Back at the border fence, the construction workers have finished their day's work and climbed into a military truck. Border guard Yuris Mazouras says securing the border won't stop when the fence is complete.
This is only the first step. We build the fence. Later we're trying to build also where we can patrolling make by motorcycles, fast and moving. And also we have another steps for get more effectivity. We also will be equipped with the optical cables and video cameras.
In June, the Baltic countries, together with Poland, requested financial support for an EU defense line along the bloc's border with Russia and Belarus. It would also include Finland's 1,300-kilometer border with Russia. According to some estimates, such a fortification could cost up to 2.5 billion euros. Ben Bartke in Latvia at the Russian border.
All this talk about external borders, but there's one story this week which could have profound consequences for Europe's internal borders as well. I am, of course, talking about the fate of Europe's passport-free Schengen area, which is hanging in the balance after Germany decided to impose temporary controls at all of its borders. To remind us what Schengen is all about, here is a helpful explainer that the European Commission put out on YouTube some 9 years ago.
This is Thomas. Thomas enjoys travelling. It's his thing. Fortunately, today there's the Schengen area. The Schengen area represents one of the EU's greatest achievements. Today, more than 400 million people can travel in Europe without any red tape or worries. And that's just perfect to satisfy Thomas's desire for new discoveries.
We'll be covering Germany's border controls and the threat to Schengen in full in the second half of our programme. But first, time to test your knowledge. The 1985 Schengen Agreement was signed in the little town of the same name. But where is it? Luxembourg? Belgium? Or Liechtenstein? Head on over to Spotify to take part in the poll. Inside Europe is, of course, also available on all the other usual platforms, including YouTube, via DW's Podcasts channel. My tip of the week, if you've not already heard it, do look up the Don't Drink the Milk episode on passports. They actually go to Schengen in that one in search of the source of the European dream of borderless travel. This is Inside Europe, and I'm Kate Laycock in Germany. This is Inside Europe, and I'm Kate Laycock in Germany, here in shameful disregard of the usual boundaries of our show, to continue our discussion of Schengen, the agreement which allows, in theory at least, borderless travel within 29 different European nations. We're talking about Schengen this week because of Germany's decision to impose temporary controls at all 9 of its borders as of Monday, 16th of September. Now, the Schengen Agreement does make provision for the implementation of temporary controls in response to exceptional circumstances, and an increasing number of countries, including Germany, have already done so in response to COVID and the so-called migrant crisis. What's new here is that all German borders will be affected, and that, as many commentators and European legislators have observed, Berlin's move does not seem to be in response to an increased security threat, but rather to the domestic political challenge posed by the electoral strength of the far-right AfD party. All in all, then, a clear case for our political correspondent, Thomas Sparrow. There was just one problem. When I phoned him up to discuss it all, he wasn't in Berlin. So, where was he?
I'm in Mallorca, out of all places. But it's still nice to talk to you about what's happening in Germany. I'm following it closely. And by the way, it's also a very big story in the last few days.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And listen, I really do appreciate you allowing us to gatecrash your holiday. So thank you so much. I'm going to make this quick. Mallorca, though, I mean, we're still on topic, aren't we? Because it is actually part of Schengen.
Yes, and Schengen has been part of the discussion in the last few days after the German Interior Minister announced border controls, on the one hand, to tackle irregular migration, on the other hand, to improve Germany's security. This comes specifically after a series of security incidents that highlighted some of the problems that Germany is facing in these two areas, but it also comes at a time when the far-right Alternative for Germany, a populist anti-immigrant party, is doing very well in the polls. And not only in the polls, they actually won a regional election in Turin here, and there's another regional election just around the corner.
This is really key. I'm just going to read you a quote, actually, from a Guardian editorial. So, Germany's decision to tighten controls at every one of its land borders seems driven chiefly by politics, is difficult to justify in law, deals a heavy blow to Europe's prized free movement, and could severely test EU unity. Right, so this is the international perception. And there's an irony, isn't there, Thomas, in that it's Germany doing this, Germany of all countries.
Germany out of all countries, specifically because Germany has pegged its own stability, its own progress, its own development to specifically the progress of the European Union project. And one of the core elements of the European Union project is precisely this open border policy, the Schengen policy specifically, and the fact that Germany, Europe's powerhouse, a country that has defended the European project all along, is now basically being congratulated by Viktor Orban and criticized by some of the other European partners for basically affecting that Schengen and affecting some of those core principles, can indeed be seen as a shock. It's not a minor decision. Okay, the German government has stressed that it is only temporary, it's for 6 months, and that they indeed informed the European Commission ahead of it. That's what the Schengen regulations actually stipulate. But there is a big debate, on the one hand, on the actual symbolism of it, as you mentioned. On the other hand, there's also a debate on the effectiveness of these measures.
And meanwhile, talks between the governing coalition parties and the Christian Democrat Union have broken down. These talks were aimed at finding a common line on the asylum and migration issue.
That common line is actually necessary in Germany because many of the decisions that are taken on asylum, on migration in general, are taken actually at the regional level. Different parties want to position themselves in order to gain back some of the votes, specifically from the far right, but also because they want to position themselves already with some of the, let's say, I'll call it the bigger prize, which is next year, federal elections. So that's why we're seeing these different parties, on the one hand, trying to have those political discussions and show a compromise. On the other hand, also clearly trying to show Germans where the differences lie, because they're trying to position themselves ahead of those federal elections next year.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Listen, I have such a guilty feeling about having gatecrashed your holiday that I wanted to end on a sort of a more hopeful, perhaps wistful note. Schengen, right? It's as old as me, by the way. 1985 was the agreement. I feel sort of quite connected to it. What's it meant to you, this ability to freely travel within Europe?
It's meant everything, and it's meant everything even before I used to live in Europe. That idea of being able to travel across a continent so varied, so fantastic, without the need to show your passport every time, without the need to go through a border control every time, is absolutely fantastic. I can understand some of the problems that this comes with. I can understand some of the challenges that not only Germany, but other governments as well are facing. But the idea as such, and the fact that it was achieved, the fact that people can travel across Europe without having to show their passport and without having these border controls, has been an absolutely phenomenal part of the European project, and one that I believe, from a very personal perspective, that European leaders should try and keep at all cost. But again, I understand some of the challenges that governments are currently facing on this issue.
Well, on that note, Thomas, I'm going to let you slip back into your incredibly well-earned holiday, and we do massively appreciate you taking the time out to talk to us.
Do you know, Kate, I love these talks, so I'm always happy to join you on the programme, even if I'm enjoying the sun in Mallorca.
Very much emboldened by that endorsement from political correspondent Thomas Sparrow there, I decided to extend my ring around and call up our Budapest correspondent, Stefan Boss. Hungary's hardline anti-immigration Prime Minister Viktor Orban was quick to welcome Germany's move with a tweet saying, "Welcome to the club, Chancellor Scholz." A gleeful reaction to Germany doing the very thing for which it has previously criticised Hungary, as Stefan explained.
The Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban somehow feels vindicated by Germany now, because he has always warned the European Union of too many illegal migrants, as he would describe it. So he feels that this only shows that he was right all along. Now, of course, critics will say that is not exactly true. I mean, there have been also people in dire need who went to the European Union. But of course, there are also people abusing the system. And I think that the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban focuses on those cases also because for his electorate, obviously. I also think, by the way, that the reaction of Germany, although they say it's has to do with acts of terror and so on, which of course is a concern in Germany. But I also think that it has to do with the decision of Hungary to start busing migrants towards Brussels. And of course, I think there is a feeling in Germany that if that's going to happen, who knows where these buses will end up. Perhaps they will stop on the way in Germany.
Right. Now, tell me more about this, because, American listeners may be pricking up their ears, because this is something that's been tried in Texas for a while, that there people coming over the border are put on buses and bused to Democrat-run states. It's a similar idea, right? And there have been pictures going around, buses in Hungary already with destination Brussels chalked up at the top.
So there was a deputy minister seen near those buses at a press conference, and you could see, for instance, Ruske Brussels. Ruske is the name of the border crossing where they enter, and Brussels, of course, is then the end destination. So he showed several buses, and he said, we are ready. The migrants will get free tickets, and we will bring them to Brussels. Now, of course, as you mentioned, this has been tried as well in the United States. And of course, we know that Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban is close friends and a very close political ally with the previous president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, who now, of course, is trying again to return to the White House, a campaign, by the way, that Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban very much supports. But I would not be surprised if in the next few days the first buses indeed will arrive in Brussels, even if it's just to send a signal to the European Commission that Hungary is no longer accepting all the EU rules regarding migration. Now, I have to say it also has to do with a big court case that Hungary had recently. The European Court of Justice fined Hungary some 200 million euro for not keeping the migration rules, and also they are fined every day another 1 million as long as they don't keep those rules. Now, Hungary has refused to pay that fine, and that's also one of the reasons why they say, you know what, we will send the migrants to Brussels, and perhaps you like it this way. Now, of course, Brussels doesn't like it. Belgium has already said, I know, that they will watch the borders. Of course, Germany is doing so. I think the only person who is really happy is a very close friend of Prime Minister Viktor Orban, Geert Wilders. He is in the Netherlands. They know each other also very well, and he has already said that he is very happy what Germany is doing, and he wants to impose similar border crossing rules. But of course, he has to count with the government. There are more parties involved, but at least Geert Wilders seems to understand Viktor Orban's approach to migration.
Welcome to the club, Chancellor Scholz, as Orban put it. I was talking there to our Budapest correspondent, Stefan Boss. Now, Greece is part of the Schengen area, so in theory, I could up sticks and enjoy visa-free travel to any one of its gorgeous islands. Santorini, for example, with its stunning beaches and beautiful sunsets. There is a problem, though. Daniel Rosny has beaten me to it. And as we're about to find out, there is trouble in paradise. With overtourism becoming a hot political issue in Greece, the government has announced that, as of next year, certain destinations will be imposing a levy on tourists and cruise ship numbers will also be limited. Yeah, better enjoy it whilst you can, Daniel. That's all I'm saying.
If you've been scrolling on Instagram or Facebook this summer, the chances are high that you've come across someone taking a selfie here as the sun sets. It really is glorious. It's one of the most beautiful parts of Greece, and one of the most stunning moments is when dusk begins. The villages that are built into these rocky mountains here have whitewashed buildings with painted blue domes that dominate the skyline. And the stunning view makes people want to visit from all over the world.
The suit was great.
What's your name and where are you from?
Maxime from France. There is a lot of tourists, which am I, which I am. Yeah, for sure, there is a lot of tourists. From France, a lot, and America also.
And have you been enjoying the sunsets?
Yes, for sure, but it's not overrated. Or never overrated, but overcrowded, and we see too much in Instagram, so...
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your holiday.
Thank you.
Below where we are is the lagoon where cruise ships dock. The population of Santorini is around 15,000, but on any one day that could easily more than double because of how many passengers get off these boats. There are a lot of problems that come with that. Infrastructure is a big one. For example, there's only one cable car that brings people from the port up to the town of Fira. You can wait more than 2 hours in queues of thousands, or you can walk up these famous 600 steps that are hacked into the mountain. But in this heat, that can take half an hour or so. Some choose instead these donkeys, and they're used to get passengers up to Fira for souvenir shopping and selfies. And people like Cornelia have watched life on the island change from her jewellery shop.
So I can understand that they are too bored to climb up, but with one cable car with only 36 people who are coming in, one line, it cannot hold 30,000 people. I came here in 1996 and I had no idea what Santorini. I mean, in 28 years, of course, it changed. Definitely. I don't think it's Instagram. It was more at the beginning of the 2000s when Santorini was always the number one island in Europe, which was most popular on coming and visiting. This made Santorini more and more popular, not, I think, Instagram.
Do you think there are too many cruises?
Yes. Daily, yes. because we have one day small cruises with 200 people, and the next day we have 8 cruises with 20,000. It has to be just more organized. If it's just more organized, then everything is much easier.
For 2025, authorities want to limit how many can come here to Santorini and other islands in Greece. A €20 levy is proposed for cruise ship visitors coming here and to Mykonos, another popular island. The Prime Minister, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, agrees citizens are being burdened with overtourism. Katerina, who sells tickets for sunset boat trips, agrees. But today's 4 cruises, she says, is relatively quiet compared to yesterday.
Oh my gosh, it was really busy. You can imagine that this street was full of people with the cruises, because the people was with the signs from the cruises.
Oh, they've got badges on, they've got stickers on.
Yes, they have the cards. Some people, some numbers, so was for sure from the groups. Santorini is just one small piece of earth.
Tourism is huge business here. Some estimates say it's 90% of the GDP for the island. Greece needs tourism as well. The sector makes between 25 and 30% of its overall economy. The Bank of Greece suggests the country is on course for a record number of visitors this year. But some think that tourists aren't spending as much as they used to, according to Tassos, who lives here.
This year is lower than other years. The problem is that we have many tourists, but they spend less than other years.
What's happening here on Santorini is not unusual. People like to go on holiday. But the Greek government says it recognises how important the industry is to the economy, but that it must also pay its special share of social returns. They'd love to keep the tourists, but would rather they were spread out a bit more in other islands. Cruise ship numbers, though, will be limited from 2025 to allow for only 8,000 passengers per day. But that's still more than half the population of the island. And you can't blame people for wanting to visit, because it really is a beautiful place. Daniel Orozny, DW, Santorini, Greece.
Nice work if you can get it. Send us your end of summer musings on a postcard or to insideeurope@dw.com. This is Inside Europe. I'm Kate Laycock in Germany. Spaghetti westerns, that delightfully quirky subgenre of Western movies, may have had Italian directors and producers at their helm, hence the name, but the landscapes were Spanish. Remember The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, the 1960s film which launched the career of a certain Clint Eastwood? Yep, that was shot in Spain. Back in 2016, the fake cemetery, Sad Hill, where the most famous scenes were shot, was rescued from nature, which had reclaimed the site. And last weekend, just outside the village of Carazo, which has a population of just 25, people the world over came to mark the opening of a second site used in the film. Our reporter, Ashish Sharma, was amongst them.
My name is Anton. I'm acting as a young lieutenant for the Southern Forces.
I'm a woman of the south part of American this history, and well, we are here trying to defend our rights for having our black people working for us.
And we are just camping and just having some tea, and we are not expecting any northern activity.
Batalla de la Guerra Civil Americana. Agradecer, obviamente.
A reenactment of a scene from the American Civil War, where northern soldiers captured their southern counterparts and marched them up to a concentration camp on a hill brow just outside the tiny village of Carazo, where some 60 years ago scenes from The Good, the Bad and the Ugly were shot. The Civil War forms the backdrop to the film, and last weekend a group of volunteers known as the Sad Hill Association officially unveiled a reconstruction of the prisoner camp in its exact location.
It's been the direction of the natural park now and the town mayor of this small village who they have decided to rebuild the concentration camp using the burn trees of the big fire that we got here 2 years ago.
Their name is taken from the fake cemetery called Sad Hill, which was a set built by the Spanish army for the iconic last scenes of the movie. Abandoned after filming and lost to nature, it was restored in 2016 to mark the 50th anniversary of the film's release. Danny Garcia and his brother Sergio were behind both projects.
I'm not the only architect. I am the visible side of the moon, not the dark side of the moon. There are a lot of people working with me, with the Burgos Film Commission, with the Sad Hill Cultural Association.
If the Sad Hill Cemetery, you could feel the bumps, especially if you are on the top of the hill, but here you couldn't see nothing. Could only figure out with the hole, the pit. That's the only...
Was that the only clue you had, that that's where they built the concentration camp? After the film, what did they do?
The set was abandoned there.
Even before the official inauguration, fans of the film, locals and many more curious tourists were snaking their way up the hill to see the reconstruction of the Betterville concentration camp.
My name is Nina Kreivik. I'm a historian from Berlin in Germany. First of all, I'm a big fan of the movie. 2 years ago, we watched a documentary about Sad Hill, a cemetery, a fake cemetery. And here right now, we are standing on another really important site. It's a kind of concentration camp. The movie at all has a kind of critic, a war critic, you can say. So this is an important place for the movie and I guess for the people here too right now.
I'm also joined by Moses. You've also travelled from far away. You've come from Zurich in Switzerland to be here. Well, why is this movie so special and important for you personally and I suppose generally as well?
Well, it's a very intimate thing, actually, because those movies, those so-called spaghetti western, most of them were made in Spain. And I was a teenager when I realized that. And this was as a child of Spanish immigrants living in Switzerland. This was a kind of a door to palliate my nostalgia for Spain. And I started enjoying these movies and watching them on my VHS recorder. And I fell in love with these movies, and for me there was a very personal thing.
The hope for the Sad Hill Association is that the site will bring in tourism that will help stimulate the region. This is an example of empty Spain, where young people have moved to major cities, leaving behind small and elderly populations.
This is an opportunity to this small village, less than 30 people living here. The empty Spain, the España vaciada, the solution is not only the visitors, the tourists, it's a structural problem, and I guess this could be an opportunity, but we need more in this small village, more invest of our authorities, because maybe in 30 years nobody lives here, and this is very dangerous to our patrimony, to our memories. We have to stop it.
Ashish Sharma, DW, Carazo.
There is a seamless community services link to be made to our final report here, but I'm not even going to do it because I just have to get it on record that for me, spaghetti westerns are all about Bud Spencer and Terence Hill. Clint Eastwood can go whistle. All of which does not bring me to our final story this week, which comes to us from just down the road in Cologne, where a dance studio has launched a workshop for seniors with Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's is a neurodegenerative disease which causes involuntary shaking of the body. Worldwide, it affects about 12 million people, with numbers on the rise as populations age. Studies show that movement and dance can have a significantly beneficial impact on patients' quality of life, but cultural offers are limited. The dance collective Resist Dance in Cologne wants to change that. Laura Kabalka reports.
Dance is often about perfectionism, about what needs to be improved. But this pilot dance project focuses on what your body can do. It's a contemporary dance workshop, and instead of strict choreographies, the participants listen to their body and the music in free movement.
Das macht totalen Spaß.
It's so much fun, and I don't even have any aches and pains like I usually do during the day. My curve always goes up and down. These 3 hours, I didn't feel anything.
This is Doro, a participant here. Doro got diagnosed with Parkinson's 14 years ago. Since then, she has seen some major changes in her body. When she's feeling low, dancing helps her.
When you get the diagnosis, that's how you're defined. And fighting this is kind of my personal battle. And that's why I wish for everyone else too, to have the courage to just go out and see what else is possible. To not just see the illness as terrible, but that there are still so many things you can discover.
Parkinson's disease is a neurological disorder that worsens over time. There is no cure. Symptoms include tremors, stiffening, slower motion, and balance issues due to a loss of dopamine production. In Germany alone, more than 400,000 people live with this disease, and because of demographic changes, the number is on the rise. But research shows that music and dance can help. In fact, all kinds of exercise do, but dance in particular. Neurologist Michel Barnier from the German Society for Parkinson's and Movement Disorders explains why.
We made the experience that as soon as a patient can move to external cues, for example, the music that is coming with the dancing, then the patients feel very good and they can make movements much nicer and better.
Such external cues can also be visual. A line on the floor, for instance, can help people to get out of the feeling of being frozen and unable to take a step. So these cues can facilitate movement. And as a result, Dr. Barnier explains, less dopamine is needed. Many people with Parkinson's take so-called L-Dopa as medication. Apart from the therapeutic effect, the participants at this dance workshop also come here to meet new people and break with their routine. Often, people with Parkinson's feel isolated and lonely due to their physical limitations. Parkinson's affects everyone differently. The symptoms and their severity vary. The workshop's instructor, Silke, has an inclusive approach.
When everyone is in the room, I think it's no longer an issue, because we don't start from the lack or the deficit, but from what is possible. One person can move faster than another, but it's like that with everyone.
There are 12 participants here. They say they're happy that finally there is a dance class nearby that caters to them. However, they have to pay out of their own pockets. There is a sliding scale, which means they can choose to pay anything between 135 and 300 euros for 3 days of dancing. This excludes people who could benefit from such an offer but cannot afford it. Seniors are the target audience. But in Germany, around 20% of pensioners are at risk of poverty. Elisabeth Habel, the initiator of this project, is well aware of this issue.
In other countries, dance programs are also financed by health insurance companies. We have to see how we can manage that here, so that it doesn't remain a financially elitist matter. That would be completely counterproductive.
Elisabeth is looking into different ways to apply for funding. She wants to establish long-term and free dance courses for people with Parkinson's in Cologne. Laura Kabelka, DW, Cologne.
The dance must go on, except for us, that is, because we've reached the end of the show. This programme was produced by Helen Sini, with help from me, Kate Laycock, and sound engineer Ziad Abu Sleiman. Inside Europe comes to you from DW in Bonn, Germany.